In this episode, we'll take a first look at the Sound Devices MixPre 10 field mixer and recorder. I just purchased this and received it a couple days ago, so this is just a high-level overview of the MixPre 10T. We'll obviously be coming back and doing a much more in-depth review after I have a chance to work with it for about a month. So first of all, the headline feature, of course, with the Sound Devices MixPre 10T is the audio quality it produces on its preamplifiers. These are, again, the Cashmere preamplifiers, which were first introduced with the MixPre 3 and 6 earlier this year. And in this case here, again, it sounds like it's pretty much the same design. And in terms of sound quality, to me, in my experiments so far, sounds really, really nice. Pretty much identical to the MixPre-6, which I had previously, and we reviewed over here. Now, this is kind of an interesting device, and I really see it as a bridge product. It's definitely above the more consumer prosumer-oriented MixPre 3 and 6, but it also sits below their professional field mixers 633, 664, and 688. So the question is who's the target audience? In this case, to me, it seems like it's for pro sound mixers needing a very small recorder and mixer with most of the features of the higher-end pro field mixers. In Sound Devices words, they say this is, quote, perfect for production sound mixers, field recordists, and sound designers. Now, that's in contrast to the MixPre 3 and 6, where they really sort of targeted that at a much wider audience, which included enthusiasts, musicians, podcasters, YouTubers, and the like. So I really look at this as sort of a pro-level device that's sort of special purpose. So I think it's a really good choice for someone who's just getting started in their career as a professional location sound mixer. I think it's also a really good device as a secondary or a backup recorder for a more seasoned mixer. In terms of pricing, this runs $1,800 US. And then just quickly, here's a comparison in size to the Zoom F8 and the Sound Devices 633, just so you can get a sense for how they stack up against each other. The MixPre 10T is a very different form factor than both of these others, definitely thinner. It's also a little bit larger on the other dimensions relative specifically to the Zoom F8. Before we go any farther, this entire episode is being recorded with the MixPre 10, so I'm not going to be able to dive into the menus here because you're hearing exactly what's being recorded while we do this. I'm using 3 different microphones. On channel 1, we have a boom microphone, the Sennheiser MKH8050. On channel 2, I have a reporter's microphone, which I'm holding here, which is a Rode reporter. And then on channel 3, we have a headset microphone from Voice Technologies, the VT Duplex. Up on the front panel here, we have the same potentiometer knobs that we saw on the MixPre 3 and 6. Obviously, because there are 8 XLR inputs, they had to put a lot more knobs on here. And you can see they're oriented in an offset sort of fashion so that you have more room. Now, I have pretty big hands, so this is definitely kind of a tighter setup than I would say, for example, on the 633 mixer. But I think it's somewhat comparable to the Zoom F8, but I think in this case, the knobs are a little bit more ergonomic, just like we talked about in our previous comparison with the Zoom F8 and the MixPre-6. So I like this setup. It is still a little bit on the cramped side, but that's sort of the price you pay to get a very compact mixer. So for me, I really view this as if I'm doing a job where I'm actually having to mix actively pretty hardcore, like through the entire piece, I would probably prefer to use my 633, but you could get the job done on this. You're just going to have to be a little bit careful. It's not as if you bump the other knobs, but they do get a little bit in the way here. So, for example, as I turn this here, you can see I have to kind of work it a little bit. So, of course, we have the touchscreen over on this side here. You can just jump into the menus. This is an interesting design, and I think it really turned out well. I was actually pretty concerned about it when I first saw it on the MixPre 6 and 3. It seemed like a very, very small screen. Turns out that the way they've implemented it, it works actually quite nicely. Now, is it perfect as a 10-input recorder here? That's a lot of stuff you have to cram into a tiny little screen. So yeah, there's a little bit of a sacrifice here in terms of the meters. So for example, the isolated channels here, I rely a lot more on the little the lines that stay in place for a second there to know how I'm coming in terms of the overall levels. There's really just not enough room to put the actual markings for a meter over on the side here. So yeah, there's a little bit of a sacrifice there. But overall, I think it still works quite nicely. And of course, you have the much larger meter for your mix here, for your left and right mix. A couple of things that changed also from the MixPre 3 and 6, instead of the star button, which you had on the MixPre 6, you now have a switch that actually does two things, and you can set what each of those do. So I can slide left if I want to do whatever the first one is, and to the right for the second one. You can see here I've turned on my slate mic. Sorry about that. So that's pretty nice. So I can set one up to be, for example, a false take if I want to roll back to the previous take. I can set it up to go to the SD card to see how things are going there, how much space I have left. I have a lot of other options I can do there, so it's pretty flexible. The recording and the transport controls are new. This is very much more like their 6 series mixers and recorders. You have essentially a small joystick here, and you push up to start recording. You press directly in to stop the recording. You press down to start playing, and you can fast forward or reverse in the other two directions there. When I first saw that on the 633, I was like, ooh, that doesn't seem like it's a great thing to work with. But actually, over time with the 633, I found that it is a very effective way to manage all the transport controls. You also have this colored ring around the transport joystick, which shows you what you're currently doing. In this particular case, I'm recording, which is what red indicates. When you're in sort of idle mode, it turns orange. And when you're playing back, I believe it turns green. Okay, then over on the left panel here, you see we have inputs 1 through 4. And we also have, those are, again, XLR, TRS combination input jacks. So you can do mic or line level on any of those, which is very nice. You also have your timecode output and input on BNC connectors. You have an auxiliary output, X1 and X2, on a 3.5 millimeter unbalanced output. You have 2 USB inputs, USB-A and a USB-C, and then of course you have your power on and off switch. The USB-C is for connecting this to a computer to use as an audio interface. And on the USB-A, you can do a couple of different things. If you want to connect a keyboard to do metadata entry, you can do that. Or you can also put a thumb drive in there. And what the MixPre does in that case is it actually can be set up to automatically copy all of your recorded files to that thumb drive. And I believe it does that in near real time. I'm not sure if it waits until you're done recording a clip before it copies, or if it's actually copying it while you're still recording. We're going to look into that in a little more detail. Over here on the right-hand side, we have a few different things here. We have our headphone output, and this is a really nice headphone amplifier. Again, the same it seems that they have on the MixPre 3 and 6, which I was really impressed with for the quality that it produces. We also have our little encoder here, which is a knob that allows you to twist and push to make menu selections or to adjust your headphone volume. And then up here we have the auxiliary microphone input, so you can run, for example, if you wanted to a wireless system into that, you could run a microphone directly into it. You could also input into the auxiliary a timecode generator if for some reason you wanted to do that. Down below here we have our micro HDMI input. This is for sending timecode from a camera that has an HDMI output and sends timecode via HDMI. So for example, my Panasonic GH5 works quite nicely with this. Not only does it send timecode, but it also enables you to use HDMI triggering codes to start and stop recording on the MixPre. So when I press record on my GH5, the MixPre 10T also starts recording. A big upgrade from the MixPre 3 and 6 is you now have balanced XLR outputs on the smaller size XLR outputs here, the TAF outputs, and that allows you to, again, send balanced signals to a camera. So this is where this is definitely a more professional grade recorder here. If you're in an ENG type situation, electronic news gathering, and you need to send audio directly to camera, you're going to want outputs something more like this versus a 3.5 millimeter unbalanced output. This is really sort of the ideal. Now, if you're going to do periodic jobs, and just every once in a while, this is a question that came up recently, the MixPre 3 and 6 can do the job. You may need to use a DI box to convert to a balanced signal. So it just depends on what you're doing. This is just more convenient here if you're going to be doing that all the time. And then, of course, over here you have inputs 5 through 8, again, on XLR TRS inputs. These are balanced inputs, and each of them can provide phantom power. Now, over on the back, we have the battery sled. I'll come back to that in just a second. We also have a 4-pin Hiroshi input here for power, external power. Now, this is a big upgrade also from the MixPre 3 and 6, and in light of the fact that this has 10 XLR TRS inputs that can all phantom power, you really needed to have options like this to get enough power in here to support all of that. So This is a really nice upgrade. That means you can run external batteries, professional grade batteries, so that can be, V-mounts and Anton Bowers, but also the smaller NPF1 style batteries, which are often used in sound bags. And also you can attach an AC adapter here when you're using this as an audio interface. So lots of good options there. Now, battery sled. It comes with an 8 AA battery sled. I've actually taken that off right now. Right now I'm using the NPF style battery sled, which I actually purchased separately with my MixPre-6. Here you can see we have a very small NPF battery on the top and a much larger one on the bottom. This is nice because you can use lots of different size batteries. If you were going for a full day shoot, for example, you might use a couple of these in your bag if your bag accommodates them. Mine does. I'm using an Orca OR30, and that actually provides a nice kind of base for everything there. So that works nicely. Some people criticize this design here because the batteries stick out the top and the bottom. But again, it's really designed for in-bag use. If you're going to use it, say, for example, with this set on a table or a cart, then you would probably either use external power there, or you would just maybe put the smaller battery on the bottom and a larger one on top where it can stick out. Now, as I mentioned before, this can be used as an audio interface. It connects via USB-C. And one note here, for those of you that have used the MixPre-6 or the MixPre-3, this one does need some power and it is not supplied via USB. So, for example, if you are planning to use it on a regular basis as an audio interface, you'll probably want to purchase the AC adapter that plugs into the Hiroshi input on the back. Overall, as an audio interface, it works quite nicely. I have a Mac, and so in my case, it's a matter of plugging in the USB-C cable, and it automatically is detected by macOS without any need to install drivers. So we'll probably talk about that a little bit more in the final review. On the Windows side, if you do opt to use it as a audio interface there, you will probably want to install the ASIO drivers. You can use it as a class-compliant device that I think is just 2 in, 2 out. But if you want access to all of the inputs, you'll want to install the ASIO drivers, which are available over at the Sound Devices website. Just to recap the power options, it does come with the 8 AA battery sled. You can also add the Sony NPF style battery sled, which is the one that we have on here. And then, of course, you can power via Hiroshi. So for those professionals that are using NPF 1 style batteries, you can definitely still use those. Of course, in terms of recording quality, it records up to 192 kilohertz at 24-bit, and it is a 12-track recorder. Now, you might think it only has 10 inputs. It has 8 XLR inputs plus a 3.5 millimeter stereo input. That makes the total of 10 inputs. But it can also record a stereo mix on top of that for a total of 12 tracks of recording. We mentioned also the Cashmere preamps earlier in the segment here. And the great thing about these, they provide 76 decibels of gain. So that is enough gain to work with almost any type of mic I've ever worked with, including ribbon microphones. So that's really nice. In terms of their overall design, they are discrete Class A, which means that they use electronic components and they're not a third-party off-the-shelf integrated circuit preamp. And you'll definitely see, based on the other things they've included here, like analog limiters, these are definitely some pretty special preamps. They do a very nice job. In regards to those analog limiters, these sit in front of the preamps to catch any spikes. Suddenly your talent gets very loud or your sound source gets very loud. This will catch those and kind of pull them back before they overwhelm the preamplifiers or overwhelm the analog to digital converter. So you won't get that clipping distortion that you often get on lesser recorders. And also on many lesser recorders, they implement limiters, if they do have them at all. They're often digital limiters, which means that a lot of the damage is already done by the time the signal gets to the digital stage, because it's already been through the preamplifier, it's already been through the analog to digital converter, where the distortion usually occurs, if it hasn't already saturated the preamp, and then the limiter applies itself. So these are really kind of a big step forward relative to digital limiters. They also have a high-pass or low-cut filter in the preamplifier stage, so I believe those are implemented on an analog basis as well. That'll give you more headroom and make a cleaner analog to digital conversion. So another thing that really kind of helps ensure that you get the top quality audio you're looking for. Now, just like the previous MixPres, the SD card for recording to is actually on the back of the unit underneath the battery sled. Some people cited that as a downside. I didn't ever really see it that way. I've done plenty of production sound mixing jobs, and yes, I do need to pull my card out maybe twice throughout the course of a day, but it's not that big of a deal. I'd rather have it in a secure place where I'm not going to accidentally bump it and ruin a recording. In addition to that, the big step up on the MixPre 10 from the 6 and 3 is that you can now also make a copy of all of your audio files to a USB thumb drive. So that's actually on the USB-A connector on the side. And I need to do a little bit more looking at that to see exactly how that works. I know it's not actually recording to the thumb drive, but I'm not sure when it makes the copy of the file. I'm not sure if that's when you actually stop recording, it then copies the file to the thumb drive, or if it actually is doing that at the same time you're recording. So we'll look at that a little closer in the final review. Another big step up on the MixPre 10T relative to the 6 and 3 is it now has an internal timecode generator. It's a temperature compensated crystal oscillator, so it's a high quality timecode generator, which means you can use this as your master clock and then use your other timecode generators to connect to cameras. And again, overall, it keeps the package a little smaller and a lot more easy to manage versus having a timecode generator sort of hanging out of the side or buried somewhere in your bag. Now, you can get the timecode in and out of the MixPre 10T on a variety of different ways. Number one, you can use the BNC in or out connectors on the left-hand side of the unit. There's also the 3.5mm auxiliary input on the right-hand side of the unit if for some reason you wanted to feed timecode in via that. And then, of course, as we mentioned before, there's the HDMI input. So if you're sending timecode from your camera to your recorder, and your camera can send timecode via HDMI, that's a great option as well. The only downside I see on that is that micro HDMI connector is a kind of a consumer grade connector. And, it's fine if you probably have your camera mounted on top of the MixPre 10 and you can kind of find ways to secure the cable using gaff tape or something so that you don't accidentally knock it out. It's just not the most robust connector. I think it's really great that they included that feature on here, but I think you should probably think long and hard about using that as your primary means of sending timecode if you're not going to have the camera mounted to the top of the recorder. Speaking of being able to mount the camera on top of the recorder, you can do that just like on the MixPre 6 and 3. It does also have the retracting 1/4-20 threaded screw on top and the included Allen key underneath the battery sled so you can get that set up each time you need it. Now, the touchscreen is nice and bright. It can be used outdoors. I've tested that extensively on the MixPre 6. It's right now it's at about 50% brightness in the recording here, but you can bump that up quite a lot. So definitely no problem using it outdoors. It's also very high resolution, easy to see. Again, the only thing, kind of a downside, I guess, is that the meters for the isolated tracks you can see along the bottom here are really pretty small. So you don't get a really, they have enough segments on them to really kind of see what's happening, but you don't have any sort of, lines that indicate exactly where you're at. So that's just kind of a trade-off of having a super small recorder. Just like the MixPre 3 and 6, there are basic and advanced and custom modes to record in. The basic mode takes all of the inputs and mixes them to a stereo mix, left and right, and just records the stereo mix. The advanced mode actually acts more like a traditional field mixer where these are actually faders, and you set the gain in the menus for each of the inputs. So you just press, and you'd set the gain there, for example. So that's a kind of a more traditional way of doing it. In the custom mode, you can also fine-tune that if you do want to be in advanced mode and record both the isolated tracks and a stereo mix, or maybe just the isolated tracks, and you can set the custom gain mode to basic so that these become gain trims instead of faders. So you have pretty much the option to do it pretty much any way you need to. And in light of the fact that this is coming out a little bit after the MixPre 3 and 6, they've done a nice job sort of updating the firmware to make that pretty simple. Just like on the MixPre 3 and 6, you do have a Bluetooth app called Wingman, and this is available not only for iOS Apple devices, but also for Android, which is a big deal because when the Zoom F8 came out, I know a lot of people were unhappy that the app for that was only for iOS, and Sound Devices has sort of one-upped them there, and you can get that app on both platforms. It's a pretty simple app. It allows you to do some basic things, just kind of start and stop recording, arm and disarm tracks, display the meters, and it allows you, more importantly, to enter metadata, which is pretty nice as well. So that, again, is available on the MixPre 10T. Now, one of the questions that came up quite a lot in the MixPre 6 and 3 is, what about safety track recording? Well, let me just address that here. I don't believe this has safety track recording, technically. You can use a splitter cable if you wanted to, take a feed from a single mic and feed it into two channels and set the gain differently on the two if you're really, really dedicated to doing that. But kind of the idea here is that you're using very high quality preamps and very high quality limiters, so you really shouldn't need safety tracks. So I just wanted to call that out because I know a lot of people were asking about that, because if you're coming from a consumer grade recorder where you have a safety track recording feature, that's kind of an expectation. Once you get up into something like this where you have quality limiters and very high quality preamps, those kind of things really aren't as necessary. So there's an initial look at the MixPre 10T from Sound Devices. I hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions or requests for things you'd like to see in the final review, go ahead and leave those down below. If you've not already subscribed, make sure you do that, and we'll be sure to get you more great videos on how to improve your lighting and sound for video. Talk to you soon.